There's always been a market for data, especially location data. But new technologies are exploding so quickly that that's forcing change. And significantly, it's forcing the way that suppliers of location data and those who build solutions around location data are also forced to change. I'm Dan Paull, I'm the CEO of PSMA Australia, and we're changing the business of location. It's going to take you back a couple of years to the 1500s. At the time, European countries were beginning their explorations of the globe. They were pushing out further and further in their tall ships on the discovery for trade, treasure, and of course, adventure. At the time, Portugal had a monopoly. They had a monopoly for spice. They were the ones that managed to find their way to the East India spice islands and were able to bring back those spices and the riches that effectively went along with that. And they had a monopoly because they knew where it was. They had the location. Now, this was much to the chagrin of the Dutch because they considered themselves to be quite the seafarers, but they had not, at the time, discovered the route. So enter my very good friend here, Cornelius de Houtman, and of course his brother Frederick, who I refer to as Niels and Fred. They were the seafarers who believed that they could crack the finding of a route and therefore begin a period of competition for the Portuguese. But what's really interesting is that those routes, that location data was so closely guarded that the only way that the de Houtman brothers could find the route to the Spice Islands was to take a holiday to Portugal. And perhaps that's putting too fine a spin on it because they were locked up for 3 years on suspicion that they were stealing the maps that would ultimately lead to the Spice Islands. Now, having been released, they then jumped on a ship and lo and behold, they managed to find their way on their very first attempt to Indonesia, the East India Spice Islands. And so thus began the competition between Portugal and Holland, or the Dutch, because they then found their way. So this was in 1595. And it's a wonderful story because it helps us illustrate for how long location data has been core to business. But things have changed, and perhaps not surprisingly, over 425 years. And it'd be fair to say that perhaps it's in the last 25 where most of that change has taken place. So we're seeing, I think, some very important influences which I'd like to touch on before we move into the story of PSMA and Geoscape. 3 things I'd like to pick out. We're all very familiar with this story about how technology is changing the market in which we're operating. But 3 things in particular: mobility, sensors, and analytics. Those 3 things, individually and collectively, have fundamentally changed the way things work. Mobile means that we're able to go anywhere with extraordinary computing capability. We're able to move information around and we're able to process that information easily and very quickly. Sensors are now allowing us to capture information at a speed and a volume that has been unprecedented. And lastly, the analytics that allows us then to operate on both of those previous areas allows us then to start gaining insight from content that has never before been captured in this way. And those 3 things in combination dramatically change the environment in which we're operating. So for an organisation like ours, if we don't respond to those changes, and we have to respond as dramatically to those changes as we've seen those changes change us, and if we don't, then we're in trouble. The second point here is the customer demand. So as we've seen those changes, that expectation from customer has also changed. Now, I like to think of pizza from this point of view, because data is like pizza. It needs to be fresh, you want it fast, and it has to be flexible. And when I say flexible, I mean I might want one piece, I might want 10 pieces, I might want it round, I might want it square, rectangular, and I want flexibility with how I pay. Now, data is exactly the same, and if you don't meet those requirements of the customer, if you can't move and be as flexible as the customer, then again, you're in trouble. And lastly, we have a dramatically shifting landscape around all of these things. So we have a government that's moved from full cost recovery around data to recognising the value of being able to open that data up, that there is value in being able to stimulate an economy by providing this data. We're also seeing some dramatic changes around business models. How do you drive a return within this marketplace that data forms the basis for? And of course, that puts pressure on things like intellectual property and licensing, and all of those things then need to be able to respond to the rapid changes that we're seeing in that environment. So this is the context in which our business, a location content business, is trying to reinvent itself and make sure that we not only maintain relevance, but are able to deliver something that is powerful and valuable to the whole economy. So we've been delivering location data for over 20 years to the Australian economy. And I'm going to blow my own trumpet here and say I think we do a pretty good job. We visit other countries around the world, and I think from an Australian perspective, we can be very thankful of the high quality data that we have available to us, and in particular, our location data. But there was a gap, and it may surprise you to learn that despite all the information that we have, and despite Australia being near the top in terms of the quality of that location content, there was an area that we knew little about, and it happens to be information about our built environment. So if I stood here 4 years ago and told you that we have no idea how many buildings there are in Australia, would you have believed that? It was true. And yet we're talking about data being the new oil, that we have a data economy that if we really want to see things grow and prosper, then we need to better understand the very basics about where buildings are. How can we have smart cities and smart towns if we actually don't have that fundamental information? So we set about understanding what that gap looked like, and we spent time talking to the market about what kind of impact does this have on your business. And they came back and told us, these are all the things that we would love to see. If you could build this product, we would be very happy. And that product consists of all of those attributes over on the left-hand side. And not just for one city, not just for the capital cities, not just for every town, but every single building in the country needs to be captured under this model. That was the vision. And not just every building, we had a whole variety of attributes associated with that building. Does it have a swimming pool? Are there solar panels? What was the land use and land cover in the surrounding area? What were the trees? What were the tree heights? What information can you tell me about property boundaries? Can we attach an address and a geocode to that? What we're doing here is creating the missing piece of the puzzle, the foundation on which all other analytics can be performed with confidence. And so we crafted this vision. And of course, people said, that's a great vision. But can it be done? Because if this is to be successful, you'll not only have to capture it relatively quickly, perhaps 12 to 18 months, but you'll then have to maintain it. So what you're telling me, they would say, is that you are going to collect all of that information for the whole of a continent across 8 million square kilometres. The number of buildings we're not entirely sure about, let's say 15 million. You're going to capture all of those attributes. You're going to do that in a way that allows you to repeat the process and a sufficient regularity to make it viable in the marketplace at a cost that means that you'll be able to get a return using technology that actually hasn't been fully tested for this kind of application before and effectively proving something that had never been done anywhere else in the world. I said, yes, that's what we're going to do. But you're only a little organisation of less than 50 people. True. True. But I believed. And I had a team that believed. And we found partners who believed. And we found technology that will allow us to do it. And we went through a process that required us to think differently. Clearly, we couldn't solve this problem if we were going to use the same thinking as others had done in the past, because this problem had not been solved previously. So, clearly, we would have to go about it in an entirely different way. But we did it. I'm very pleased to say that I find it quite extraordinary, perhaps even staggering, that such a thing could be achieved by just a few people and belief. Oh, and some fantastic partners like AWS. So what we have managed to do was bring together a group of organisations from all across the globe, fuse some extraordinary technologies together, and deliver a solution to an enormous problem that had never been solved before. And as a consequence, we're able to deliver one of the richest data sets available at a continental level anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. So that's quite a feat. Makes me proud to be an Australian. I'll be able to stand up at conferences over the world, and I have done, and with a very big smile say, you don't have one of these, but we do. I have to say there's some people following very quickly behind us, because once you prove that it can be done, it's amazing how quickly other people come along and start doing it as well. But nonetheless, we've generated a fantastic result. But you know, that's just the beginning. We now have data. The richness of this data is quite extraordinary, as you can see from these images here. This is a vector-based, analytics-ready data set. Captures every single building in the country. Your house will be there. Your garden shed will probably be there. And a whole range of attributes that allows then some extraordinary use cases to be satisfied. So this is very exciting, because for a long time, many of these use cases were being satisfied at a much lower level by estimates, by guesstimates, assumptions and so forth. But what we're now able to see is that there is an extraordinary number of applications that can use this data. But there is a problem. And to some extent, it's a bit of a paradox. I don't know if there's any Lego builders in the room, but big blocks are easy and they're not complicated, but they don't generate a particularly good model. Lots of small blocks deliver a great model, lots of detail, but they're also harder to build and far more complicated. This data is small blocks, very small blocks. And so the implication is you end up having to deal with lots and lots of very rich and quite complex data. And that stands in the way of many of those use cases being satisfied. So having collected this data, having solved so many problems, having delivered to Australia one of the finest location data sets on the globe, we're now struck another problem, which is how do we make it accessible? How do we make sure that all of those organisations that can benefit actually are able to use it? So this was the next problem that we needed to solve. So it's all about content so far. And I've talked to you about content, good quality content. But the thing is, it's not just about how good the content is, it's about whether the customer is getting what they want. So it's as much about refining the delivery mechanisms and focusing on the customer experience. And you know, we'd been a product company for a long time. We knew how to build data products. We knew how to build location products. But the next challenge for us was to reorganise ourselves and to learn how we could then expand the utilisation of those products by focusing more on how could customers interact with it in a way that made it easy for them. Despite the richness and complexity of those data products, could we build a mechanism that allowed them to access that easily and simply? Well, yes, was what we decided. And we wanted to enhance that customer experience so that this content could be available to anyone. So how do you do that? We think there's a whole range of important differentiators if you want to democratise access to this really high quality rich data. So we've got this need to be able to allow people to self-serve. There has to be lots of flexibility in terms of the pricing and licensing and access arrangements. Obviously, it has to perform at scale. If we have everybody using this and everybody accessing this, then scale is certainly something that we need to be able to deliver. Easy integration is essential. The less that you interfere with existing business processes whilst delivering additional value through the introduction of location information, the better you are, the easier it is to introduce. And these things all mean that the best place for this is the cloud. It needs to live in the cloud. That makes it accessible. That means it can be where you are. It means that you aren't slowed down and that you can maintain flexibility. I love this slide. I don't entirely understand this slide. I am not an enterprise architect, but what I can tell you is that we've had a lot of help in making sure that we can solve these problems. And this slide actually comes from another very important partner of ours, ThoughtWorks, who have been working with us to help design how we build a digital platform in the AWS environment that allows us to solve these problems. And of course, the reason that we like the combination of AWS and the ThoughtWorks approach to digital platforms is that it's extremely flexible and allows us to move really quickly and continually reinvent and evolve and shape what it is that we deliver, because effectively you need to be able to move as quickly and be as flexible as your customers. And this approach to building, refining, consolidating and then relaunching your digital platform allows you to do that. So it's extremely flexible. Just looking then a little more deeply into this and analysing it from the infrastructure perspective, why was it that we went with AWS? Well, clearly all of the things that we needed to be able to deliver sit natively within the AWS environment. And that provides, there we go, that's all of them, and it provides us with the opportunity to be able to bring all of those things together and have a solution in one place. Of course, for a small organisation, the opportunity to be able to access computing power and storage beyond anything that you could possibly afford is just a dream. And we have a team that gets very excited about some of the things that they're able to access because we have a relationship that is infrastructure as a service. And I see Hui in the audience here who smiles every day because of access to this, access to this equipment. But the great thing about this environment is that you can leverage all of that activity and yet only pay a very small amount of money. And so this opens up the opportunity for you to start to explore solutions to problems that would have previously required supercomputers that would have been completely out of the realms of possibility. And that allows you to sort of change your mindset about experimentation and innovation. And those things are incredibly important if you want to start pushing some new ideas and changing attitudes and pushing boundaries. The other thing I really like about this environment is, and this is about a philosophy and an attitude within AWS that we've found, which is I want to be able to do this and I can't. And so AWS helps find a solution to that problem. But even better, once they've solved that problem, that's then available to others. And so you have this network effect taking place as well. And what you see is this blossoming capability of all these different things becoming available and emerging from that environment. And that then just leverages further what it is you're able to do. This is a very exciting place to be testing new things and trialling new things and trying to solve problems that were previously very, very difficult. So these things all go hand in hand, and in effect what we're getting from AWS, which is infrastructure as a service, is allowing us to offer Geoscape our data as a service. And so those two things go hand in hand, and many of those benefits that come along the way can be passed from one to the other and then on to the customer. So of course, if you want to know more about Geoscape, please feel free to ask me or any of the other PSMA people in the room. But the story's not over yet, because if you introduce significant change around technology, then you need to introduce significant change that goes beyond that. It has to look at how do people deal with that change, and how do you make sure that things are structured to give them the best opportunity to utilise that technology. And I've had some interesting conversations recently about what exactly does that mean. So these are the reasons that we wanted to change. And these are fundamental business drivers. We needed to be faster. We needed to be able to scale what it was that we were doing, and we needed to be able to do that with greater velocity. We needed to create an environment that allowed and encouraged creativity and innovation. Now, we knew that these things were going to be really important, but we also knew that some of the fundamental elements were difficult to achieve inside the organisational structure that we had and with the culture that we had. So we'd done a fantastic job of solving a technical problem, but we could see that the way that we'd structured ourselves and some of the culture that we had utilised and had inside the organisation was actually a barrier to that technology being properly leveraged, and for us to get the best from it, we needed to change. And so thus began what became quite an interesting process of culture change for the organisation as we determined what it was that we needed to do. How did we ensure that we could get the most from it and do so in a way that was long-lived? Because innovation equals technology plus culture. So before I went through this process, I was not as strong an advocate for culture as I am now, but I can guarantee you that if you want to make the most of a technology change and you ignore culture, or even you don't invest appropriately in culture, then you will never see the full return that you could have achieved. And I think that's a really important point. Agile solves everything. Everybody knows that. And it's so easy to do. That is such a lie. Agile is fantastic, but it's one of those things that you have to be very conscious of. What does it really mean, and how do you make it work? Obviously, it has some great benefits. When we were looking around at the problems that the organisation had in terms of its structure and its culture, one of the things that we identified was that the Agile philosophy would actually help us achieve some of those things that were really important to the organisation. The speed, the velocity, helping create that environment of innovation. Those things are leveraged by the philosophy of Agile. And so we knew that this had a role to play in the future of the organisation, but we weren't sure exactly how that was going to play out. We used to have a very typical hierarchical structure, functionally driven, very standard, and it was getting in the way of us delivering on what it is that we wanted to achieve. And in the end, after having looked around a lot, we came across Spotify, and this is a well-known use case, and I'm sure many of you will be aware of it. But we found that the things that had driven them to make the changes that they did inside their organisation were the same things that were driving us. And as a consequence, there were many things that they did that we could see would work for us. And so we used their model as the basis for restructuring the whole of our organisation. Now, I'm not talking about agile teams in our development area. I'm talking about enterprise agile. I'm talking about fundamentally changing every aspect of the organisation to adopt the agile philosophy. So we now have a flat organisational structure. We have cross-functional teams that are focused on specific missions, and those teams are largely autonomous because autonomy means quicker decisions, it means faster to respond. It's all about the agility. But it's also far more satisfying because those people can come together around a problem. They bring the whole of themselves to that problem, not just the skill set for which they were hired. And that kind of collaboration naturally breeds wonderful innovation and creativity. That's what we wanted in our organisation. And that's what we needed in order to fully leverage the technology. See, those two things, they go hand in hand. And if you don't fully do one, then you'll miss out on all the benefits of the other. So collaboration, whilst it's incredibly important inside the organisation, you can't stop there. There is so much going on and there are so many other things happening that true success can only come from collaborating externally as well. The solutions that we found to the problems that we set ourselves, the challenges of building Geoscape in the first instance, was focused very much on understanding who else could help us solve this problem and who else believed that the problem could be solved, and finding those people and bringing them together. This is how success will look in the future. And in fact, I put it to you that without those things, success in the future will be very hard to find because not all the smart people work in your organisation. In fact, quite often the smart people work somewhere else because you just can't pay them enough. And so the idea is to find out where those people are and then find out what is it that we can do together that helps build something for both parties. So for me, this is a really important lesson that's come from our whole journey. Our innovation partners, well, I've spoken about AWS and the role that they've played in helping us solve these problems. But there are others as well. I've mentioned ThoughtWorks. We have a partner in the US, Maxar, and we have a number of other organisations, even local organisations like Synergy, who helped us with our understanding agile structures and agile coaching and so forth. And so these partnerships are incredibly important, but they allow us to explore new ways of innovation, how to transform and how to thrive. With location data, our aim is to help business and government shift from analysing what's happened to predicting what will happen. We want to make that shift from people-centric, heavy lifting decision-making to far more automated decision-making that's based on having access to machine learning and the data that's necessary to be able to drive those insights. Because that allows us to push that innovation and that thinking space forward and have those other things that take up time dealt with by these automated approaches. And so this is the key, I think, for shaping our new business opportunities and improving service delivery into the future. And I think it's fair to say that I'm not alone in voicing those views. So where does that leave us? Well, disruption is uncomfortable. It is. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, then you're not being disrupted, or perhaps you are and you don't know it yet, which would be even worse. Certainly our organisation has adopted the stance that change is the standard and disruption is what we want to do, not have it done to us. And that means that you're in a constant state of discomfort until you become I guess, aware of what that means, and that is good. That's a good thing, to be tested, to be pushed. And these are the things that I think we need to be becoming more comfortable with. So don't be shy about disruption. Seek it out, and remember that there are those other elements that are really important. Technology's great, but people make it work, and you have to get those two things together and working correctly. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the journey I've taken you on this morning. Have a good day.